Though not that likely when creating games for classic platforms, there is something to be said for watching how a developer or development team happens to grow over time. From early releases showing promise to modern games delivering on it, it truly makes for a catalogue of interesting gems to explore. Covert Bitops is one such team, and Steel Ranger, their 2018 release, makes for an interesting twist on their established formula. This is Beyond The Scanlines, a series focusing on interesting games on classic computing and gaming platforms. Published through Psytronik software, Steel Ranger might appear as a standalone game, at least at first glance. But in a small way, it's connected to Covert Bitops' 2016 title Hessian. Granted, this connection is relatively small, as Steel Ranger takes place in the far future, one in which humanity finds itself under threat from a hostile machine intelligence. It has constructed a vast offensive fleet and has brought humanity into a dangerous war for survival. This is where you come to the picture as the newest member of the crew of the Scourge, a ship sent out to scout for information and intelligence to be used against this mechanized foe. When a mysterious signal is found emanating from an isolated world, the crew is authorized to investigate the planet. The descent doesn't go to plan, with the Scourge being shot down during approach. Once the dust settles, as the only member of the crew who managed to get into their ranger suit, you now take point to explore the planet, find the source of the transmission, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to stop this threat. The opening is a great way to introduce you to the game's setup. After customizing your character, you can speak with the crew as you make your way down into the armory, where your suit is located. With this out of the way, you're now on the surface of the planet, and it's time to get exploring. Compared to Covert Bitops' other games, Steel Ranger is focused less on character interactions and narrative, and more on exploration, gunplay, and general action. Your ranger suit is quite a handy piece of kit for the field, even if it's not well equipped in terms of weapons, at least at the outset. You're armed with a rapid-fire rifle which carries a limited supply of ammo. If you do run out, thankfully you're not completely helpless, as you can continue to fire it, just at a far slower rate. Where their other games offered melee options as well, ditching them for Steel Ranger makes things flow far better in battle. It also helps with simplifying inventory and item management as well. Defeated enemies tend to drop various pickups. These range from those which could recharge your suit's energy or fuel supplies, something we'll talk about later, but you'll also find them for other weapons. There are 7 more to find over the course of your mission, ranging from conventional heavy-duty weapons like missiles and grenades to more exotic ones like lasers and plasma weapons. Juggling these isn't the pain it may seem at first, as you can quickly switch weapons from the keyboard, either by directly jumping to a weapon with a given number key, or cycling between them with the comma and full stop keys, or just pressing space to pick the next. It's possible to do this with the joystick as well, whereby double tapping the fire button will allow you to push left or right to cycle your weapons. I appreciate this being available, but to be honest, found it a bit too fiddly for combat. Thankfully, you can disable it from the game's options, which is also where you can set the difficulty level. Your first overall goal is to gain access to a security tower. Reaching this and exploring it will reveal one of the game's major systems: suit upgrades. Some of these are mandatory to proceed, and so I found it specialised one-off upgrade stations. Such as the very first one you'll find, which allows you to transform into a wheel for greater mobility, alongside being able to drop mines. Now, as fancy as it sounds, you can only use this whilst your suit has fuel, and when that runs out, you'll need to wait for it to replenish before activating it again. Others are optional expansions to a suit capabilities, and so could be purchased with parts dropped by defeated enemies or found around the map. Unlike the mobility upgrades, these range from improving the overall strength of your armour, increasing the amount of fuel or ammo you can carry, and other types of improvements which greatly help as you explore further and further into the machine city and its surroundings. Installing them is a case of having enough parts, then accessing one of the many upgrade terminals located across the map. You'll also find terminals here which can refill your suit's power for the cost of a part, plus others which manufacture ammo for the weapons you've currently acquired. Progress for games like this is typically reliant on collecting specific weapons or equipment in order to open up new areas. This mostly applies with Steel Ranger, but you'll also need to hunt down keys to unlock particular sections as well. Obtaining them is mostly straightforward, as you'll find terminals in certain locations which can generate the access cards required. Of course, standing between you and the access cards are some large Guardian robots. Early on, they'll make for some tough battles, typically as you don't have many weapons to hand and your Ranger armor is not really going to have many upgrades installed, but things will change later on. So dealing with these Guardians makes the perfect time to talk about death. Yours specifically. Being killed by enemies may sound like a downer, as you would expect there to be some form of backtracking once you respawn after dying. Thankfully, it's not really much of an issue with Steel Ranger. When you die, you're prompted to continue the game or save and end. Continuing puts you back at the start of the current room, without needing to hit up the disc, meaning you're back in the action right away. The save and end option allows you to save your place to one of the game's 4 save slots on the disc, returning you to the title screen afterwards, just what you need when wrapping up a play session. It's also possible to do this outside of the death sequence, as pressing run stop at any point pauses the game, bringing up an overview screen. From here, besides saving and ending your session, you can access a screen showing the state of your suit, featuring both your acquired weapons, but also any upgrades you have installed. You've also got a map which shows both your current position, as well as what you've uncovered thus far. You can pan this about in a limited fashion, admittedly, to help get your bearings on where you should be heading. Especially as the game starts to open up from this point. With access to the wider machine city, your explorations will take you deep into its computer core, which is where another pass is to be found. At least once you crack the puzzle which blocks access to the terminal. An event which, thankfully, doesn't lead to another Guardian encounter. For a city designed by machines, you'd expect a bit of a uniform look to the structures you'd encounter. But across the locales found in Steel Ranger, all offer their own unique graphical style, and feature a distinctive choice of colours from the C64's palette for displaying things on screen. In fact, I'd say the visuals can be quite striking in parts, with one example I dig in particular being the colour effects used within the dark caves you'll encounter later on, as they cycle colours to make things feel a little more ominous than one might expect otherwise. Before you can get there though, there is the processing area to explore, filled with more dangerous robots and a fancy weapon or two. You'll find plenty of secret nooks and crannies to explore as well, and a keen eye is necessary to realise that there are places which are vulnerable to a handy bomb or two which you can drop when you use your wheel form, an upgrade you acquire early on. It's usually worth finding these, as inside the rooms you'll find a mix of pickups, either parts, power refill, or ammo packs lying about. Granted, you're not going to be able to find all of them or access them on your first sight in an area, but that's really not a surprise for this type of game. Working your way down to the bottom of the processing area reveals the entrance to the mines, where the next mobility upgrade, the high jump, can be found. It's also where you'll encounter the first of the truly nasty enemies, with the various mining robots you'll have to fight. Being handy on the weapon selection is critical here, along with being able to easily get to a safe space to avoid taking damage, which isn't quite as straightforward as it should be due to the controls. For the most part, Steel Ranger's controls offer responsive movements. There are a few fiddly aspects, not including the weapon selection which I talked about earlier. The biggest though was the inertia to your Ranger's movement. By itself it's not really an issue, but when you're trying to line up with smaller platforms to avoid those large mining robots and their attacks, it can be a bit of a tricky art to do so without taking any damage. that's really the only weak spot here, as for the majority of your time, they won't cause any issues. In fact, a big highlight, if anything, is how improved certain aspects are, such as walking on stairs. Anyone familiar with Hessian should be relieved by that alone, based on the fiddliness that it was in that game. Which, considering how Steel Ranger places its focus on action over narrative and character development though, it really shouldn't be a surprise all up. Reaching the deepest depths of the mines now leads you to those dark caves I talked about earlier. There are plenty of mysteries abound here, but the next development in the story comes once you emerge from the other side and into a long abandoned vault. It's here where you'll truly learn why the broadcast was made and what needs to be done to put an end to the machine forces and this vile conflict. All which stands between you and an end to the conflict is fighting your way up to Omega's tower, confronting that mechanized beast and bring him down. Unsurprisingly, this approach is not an easy battle. You'll certainly want to have all the available weapons equipped and be willing to use them all in order to cut through the many threats you'll encounter on your way to the top. I'll admit, once I reached Omega's chamber, I wasn't really expecting that the final fight would be over as quickly as it was. In fact, outside of the first couple of bosses, most of the encounters were ones I could take care of with only a few attempts at best. Though, I didn't mind it. I would have loved had the final encounter been one which offered a bit more challenge than some of those other ones which came before. This is not a major downside. In fact, I really appreciated that it was beatable, as there are far too many games out there which make these final conflicts excessively challenging. Something which can honestly turn off most players, at least outside of the seriously dedicated types, off from wanting to come back and finish it and see the ending. Which means if more players can actually beat it to get that ending, the result is more than worth it in my book. And I'm sure you'll agree, especially as you watch the ending sequence. There is a surprise, however, one which does give you a reason to go back, as in fact there are a few optional objectives which are worth finding. They're not talked about, but careful exploration of the world will reveal them, and completing them will make that ending feel so much more satisfying, showing the crew escaping and setting up an actual end to the conflict. The story of Steel Ranger may not be as in-depth as those of Covert Bitops' earlier games, or later ones for that matter. But the result is that it's a far more approachable work, offering a smoother experience, especially for those who are new to the games. What contributes to the overall package is the soundtrack, with unique pieces across many of the areas of the world, alongside pieces for boss battles and more. It contributes to the atmosphere, making the exploration haunting, yet thrilling, and even oppressive at points too. Something I found, which is quite frankly greatly understated, is the game's loading system. Load times when moving between sections of the world are incredibly quick. It helps keep the game flowing, especially compared with many other C64 releases. Though I'm playing this from the disc version of the game, it is worth noting that if you choose to go for the digital download route, you can also get a cartridge version to run on suitable hardware, and that's probably going to speed things up even more over just playing from the discs. That is really only the first step in the technically excellent nature of the work though. Though it may not throw around the amount of enemies and bullets as you get with the likes of Turrican, one of its major inspirations, it does mean the result shows little slowdown, but more importantly, flicker-free visuals. Steel Ranger is a work I find rather incredible, as it's a game that doesn't demand a large amount of your time to finish, and can be comfortably played in quite a few nights. The challenge it offers is solid, but more importantly, it's fair, and that truly makes for an exciting package, even after all this time from its original release. One last thing it's worth talking about. I had planned to look at this upon its original release in 2018, but found I didn't click with it right away, and the pressures of a weekly production schedule at the time meant I found it tough to allocate the time to really explore it properly. In a way, it shows the limitations such a schedule offers, at least when it comes to checking out more involved games, as it limits the time one has to give something a serious play before having to move on and pick something else to cover. I am glad to have made the effort to come back to it though, as it's an experience I well and truly enjoyed. Being able to enjoy it at my own pace, without that pressure, contributed not only to me enjoying the game more, but also feeling like I could explore it in a way which it well and truly deserved. If anything, it just confirms the ideas which have been circulating in my head around a number of things for some time. How timeless a great game is, no matter whether it's on a modern system or a classic system, is probably the first of those. The second is that I carry an increasing dislike of the pressure to get a video out the door quickly when a game does come out, especially when little or no lead time is offered for some of these works. More than ever, my interest around gaming on classic systems is the discovery of the interesting, the intriguing, and those titles, whether new or old, which try to offer something new. Instead of focusing on that need to rush a video out the door within a week when a game comes out, it's important to acknowledge that quality explorations like this do take time. And I hope it's something you continue to appreciate with upcoming episodes of Beyond The Scanlines, as this episode is the final one planned for 2020, giving me a little bit of time to recharge, recover, and get ready for some exciting videos ahead in 2021. This past year, in fact, has been a challenging one for many of us, for many, many reasons. It's also contributed to a bit of a direction shift in what I want to achieve with my videos. Most important to me, though, is the support of those fine folks who are able to contribute via Patreon. Without their help, the resources I'd have on hand to produce this series would be far more restrained, and I'm incredibly grateful for their continued support during this time. If you do feel strongly about the series and you enjoy what I'm putting out, I hope you'll consider supporting the show as well, if you have the means to do so. As always, my biggest thanks goes to you for taking yet another voyage beyond the scanline.